The hardest part of looking at the photos wasn't seeing my sister surfing in Hawaii, or hiking some ridge trail in Colorado with her arms thrown wide against the sky, or crossing the finish line of a charity marathon with a paper number pinned to a shirt that had clearly never once touched a wheelchair. It was doing the math. Every step in every photo had a dollar figure attached to it in my head, automatically, the way my brain had been trained to calculate almost everything for 6 years. That trailhead in Colorado, that was roughly the cost of 1 month's rent I'd wired my parents in March. The surfboard in Hawaii, brand new, still had a price tag I could estimate within $20, because I'd been the one paying for what my parents called her adaptive equipment fund for 2 years running. The marathon, the actual marathon, a 26.2-mile run my sister had apparently trained for and completed on legs my family had spent 6 years insisting would never bear her weight again. I didn't even want to calculate what that one had cost me in overtime, in skipped vacations. In every version of my own life I had quietly set down so hers could stay comfortable. I sat in my dark home office at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night, my second monitor still open to a code review I'd abandoned 20 minutes earlier, and I scrolled through 4 years of my sister's secret life without saying a single word out loud. Not to her, not to my parents, not even to myself really, not in any form that used language. I just scrolled and calculated and felt something in my chest go very quiet and very cold. The particular quiet that arrives after shock has finished being shock and started turning into something with edges. But to understand how I ended up in that chair doing that math, I need to take you back 6 years, to the night my sister's accident happened and the 6 years of my life that came after it. I want to be honest about something before I tell you the rest of this story, because it matters for everything that follows. My sister's accident was real. I need you to understand that clearly, because everything that came later only makes sense against the backdrop of something that, at the beginning, was not a lie at all. 6 years ago, Emily was 26. Riding in the passenger seat of a car a drunk driver hit head-on at an intersection 2 miles from our parents' house. She spent 3 weeks in the ICU. She underwent 4 surgeries on her spine and pelvis. For the better part of a year, the doctors genuinely did not know whether she would walk again. And I remember sitting in that hospital waiting room with my parents, all 3 of us gray with exhaustion, praying for the same thing with a unity I don't think our family had felt before or has felt since. She qualified for SSDI 8 months after the accident, and nobody, least of all me, questioned that decision. She'd earned it in every sense that mattered. I was 27 then, 2 years into my first real software engineering job, and when my parents asked if I could help cover the gap between her disability payments and her actual medical costs, I said yes without hesitation, the way you say yes to anything when someone you love is genuinely suffering. I want you to understand that I would have kept saying yes forever if the story had stayed what it was in that first year. I don't resent having helped a sister who genuinely needed it. What I resent, what took me 6 years to fully see, is the 6-year performance that came after she stopped needing it at all. The physical therapy notes, which my mother used to read aloud to me over the phone in the early years, showed real steady improvement for about 18 months. Sensation returning, range of motion increasing. A cane eventually replacing the wheelchair for short distances, and then somewhere around the 2-year mark, according to the version of events my family told me, everything plateaued. Emily's recovery, they said, had simply stopped. Chronic pain. Unpredictable flare-ups. Some days she could stand for a few minutes, most days she couldn't. She would never work again, they said. She would never fully recover, they said. The word permanently started attaching itself to every sentence about her condition, spoken with a flat finality that discouraged follow-up questions. I never saw a doctor's note confirming any of that plateau. I understand now, with the particular clarity that only arrives after you've already been made a fool of, that I never saw one because I never asked to, because asking felt, at the time, like a cruelty I wasn't capable of inflicting on a sister who'd nearly died in a car crash 2 years earlier. The money requests grew steadier after that. Rent because Emily couldn't reliably work and my parents' income alone couldn't cover a household of 3. Medical bills, itemized in messages that always arrived with just enough vague specificity to feel legitimate without ever actually inviting scrutiny. Adaptive equipment, a specialized mattress, a home health aid for the bad weeks. I wired money almost every month for 6 years. Amounts that started around $600 and by year 5 regularly exceeded $3,000. An amount that meant I worked 70-hour weeks not to build any life of my own, but simply to keep funding a life I was told my sister no longer had the option of building. Whenever I hesitated, whenever a bill arrived at an inconvenient time, or I asked, gently, whether there was any updated medical documentation I might see, my mother had a phrase ready, deployed with the practiced ease of something she'd said 100 times before. "I can't believe you'd question this. Your sister can't walk and you're asking for paperwork. She almost died and you're worried about your bank account. You've always been the strong one. This is just what family does for each other." I absorbed every version of that sentence for 6 years. I canceled a vacation to Portugal to cover an emergency that turned out, I'd later learn, to correspond almost exactly to the week Emily flew to Hawaii. I worked through 2 Christmases from my desk, video calling my family for 20 minutes between deadlines, while my parents told relatives what a devoted, sacrificing daughter I was. A compliment that always arrived paired somehow with an unspoken reminder that devotion was the baseline expectation rather than anything worth thanking me for. I never resented Emily for the accident. I want that understood clearly. What I didn't yet know, sitting in my dark office 6 years later, was that I had stopped, at some point I couldn't precisely date, funding my sister's recovery and started funding something else entirely, and that the 2 people who should have told me the difference had decided, deliberately, not to. The photo appeared on a Tuesday night, in the ordinary, accidental way most devastating discoveries seem to arrive, not through investigation, not through suspicion, just through the blind, indifferent churn of a social media algorithm surfacing a public album from someone I barely knew. I was taking a break from a code review, scrolling without much attention, when a mutual acquaintance's Coachella photo dump loaded into my feed. Dozens of images from a festival weekend, crowds, string lights, the specific saturated colors of a phone camera trying too hard in golden hour. I almost scrolled past it entirely. I stopped because something in the 4th photo caught at the edge of my attention before my conscious mind had fully processed why. A woman in the background, dancing, arms raised, weight balanced easily on both legs, laughing at something outside the frame. I sat completely still for a long moment before I let myself zoom in, some part of me already bracing for what I was about to confirm. It was Emily, not blurry, not ambiguous, not some coincidental resemblance I could talk myself out of. My sister, tagged by name in a public photo, standing and dancing at a music festival during a month my mother had specifically told me Emily was having one of her worst flare-up weeks in months. A month I had wired an extra $400 specifically, because my mother said Emily needed a new heating pad and couldn't get out of bed. I clicked the tag before I'd fully decided to. It led to a profile I didn't recognize, not the account I followed, the one full of quiet, muted photos of Emily on the porch, wrapped in blankets, captioned with things like *grateful for small good days. This was a second account, an alt privacy settings apparently set to allow tagged photos to surface publicly even though the account itself required a follow request. 4 years of content. The earliest post dated barely 6 months after the timeline where my family had told me her recovery had permanently plateaued. I sat there for the next 3 hours, scrolling backward through 4 years of my sister's actual life. Surfing in Hawaii, the caption reading, "finally back in the water after way too long." A hiking trail in Colorado, a triumphant photo at the summit, geotagged, timestamp. A half marathon, then a full one, an official race bib visible in a finish line photo, her real name printed clearly across the paper. I didn't cry. I want to be honest about that too, because I think people expect tears at this point in a story like mine. And what I actually felt was something quieter and colder than grief. A kind of internal stillness settling over me the way ice settles over a pond slowly from the edges inward, until the whole surface is solid enough to hold weight. My phone rang while I was still sitting there, my mother's contact photo filling the screen, and I answered it on the second ring with a steadiness that surprised even me. "Sweetheart," she said, her voice already arranging itself into the particular register she used for money requests, warm and slightly urgent at once. "I hate to ask again so soon, but Emily's wheelchair needs a repair. The motor's making a terrible sound, and the shop says it'll be $600, we just don't have this month." I looked at the screen still open on my second monitor, at a photograph of my sister free-climbing a rock face in Colorado, her arms corded with muscle, a wheelchair nowhere in sight, nowhere in her life at all as far as I could now tell. "Of course," I said, "I'll send it tonight." I hung up the phone, and I did not send the money that night or ever again after that call, though I let my mother believe for a little while longer that I had. I opened a new folder on my hard drive instead, and I named it, with the flat, procedural instinct of an engineer rather than a sister asterisk documentation. I told my parents 3 days later that my company had cut salaries company-wide due to a restructuring. It wasn't true. I'd actually just closed a performance review with the highest rating of my 6-year career. But it was the first lie I had ever told them in either direction of this relationship, and I remember how strange it felt to say it, not guilty the way I expected. Almost clarifying, like finally speaking the same language they'd been speaking to me for 6 years. "I can still help with essentials," I said, "but I need to scale back for a while, maybe a few months." The silence on the other end of the call lasted just long enough for me to hear exactly how unwelcome that sentence was. "A few months," my mother repeated, her voice sliding immediately into the register I now recognized, with total clarity, as manipulation rather than genuine distress. "Your sister can't just pause her medical needs for a few months, Rachel. Do you understand what you're saying?" "I understand what I'm saying," I said, and hung up before she could layer on the next sentence in a script I'd heard so many times I could recite it alongside her. The calls that followed over the next 2 weeks grew steadily more vicious in a way that told me more than any photograph had about how little actual concern for my well-being had ever been mixed into 6 years of guilt. My father, who rarely got involved directly, called to tell me I was turning my back on this family the second things got inconvenient for you. My mother sent a 4-paragraph text describing, in detail, how selfish I'd become since moving into that fancy tech job, a description that ignored entirely the 70-hour weeks I'd worked specifically to fund a life she'd apparently been quietly building for someone who didn't need the money at all. Emily herself texted once, uncharacteristically direct, "Wow, nice to know what I actually mean to you." I didn't respond to any of it. I want to be clear that this silence wasn't restraint born of hurt feelings. It was strategy, cold and deliberate, the same instinct that had once told me not to confront a security breach before I understood its full scope. I wasn't going to warn them. I was going to build a case they couldn't talk their way around. I spent the following 3 weeks doing, in my own family's life, exactly what I did professionally for corporate clients dealing with fraud and data breaches. Except this time the subject was my sister's Instagram account, and the client was, uncomfortably, myself. I started with the alt account itself, archiving every public post methodically before Emily could think to lock it down or delete it. Screenshots, yes, but more importantly the underlying files, downloaded directly where the platform allowed it, preserving embedded EXIF metadata that most casual users never think to consider. Exact GPS coordinates, device information, and, most critically, original capture timestamps that couldn't be altered by a caption written days or weeks after the fact. The Coachella photos carried location data placing Emily in Indio, California, on a weekend my mother's texts, still saved from years back, described as one of Emily's hardest weeks yet. The Colorado hiking photos geolocated to a trailhead outside Boulder on dates that lined up, almost to the day, with a $1,200 medical emergency. Wire transfer I'd sent for what I'd been told was an unplanned hospital visit. I built a spreadsheet. I am, at my core, still an engineer, and a spreadsheet was the only language that could hold what I was feeling without breaking me open in the process. Cross-referencing every financial request I'd fulfilled over 6 years against the geo-tagged, time-stamped evidence of exactly where my sister had actually been, and exactly what she had actually been physically capable of doing at the time. The marathon was the piece that finished the picture entirely. A regional charity race, official results published publicly, Emily's real name and finish time listed in a searchable database alongside her official racebib photo, time-stamped and dated 11 months earlier, directly overlapping with a 6-week stretch during which my parents had asked me with escalating urgency to help cover in-home physical therapy they said Emily needed because she'd become entirely bedbound again after a bad flare-up. I found, eventually, digging further back through years of archived posts and cross-referencing dates against my own bank records, that the pattern didn't start recently. It started almost exactly 2 years after the accident, the same point in the timeline where my family had told me Emily's recovery had permanently plateaued. I want to be precise about what that meant once I let myself see it clearly. My sister had not been faking an injury from the very beginning. She had genuinely needed help once in a hospital bed in a way that broke my heart to remember even now. But at some specific, identifiable point, her body had recovered in ways her family chose never to report to anyone. Not to me, not to the Social Security Administration, not to any of the state and federal programs that had continued, faithfully, sending checks to a household my parents had quietly decided to keep collecting from indefinitely. It hadn't been my sister's decision alone, either, once I understood the full shape of it. My parents had submitted, I learned much later, sworn continuing disability review affidavits every 2 years, each one describing Emily as unable to stand for more than a few minutes at a time, unable to work in any capacity, entirely dependent on caregiving, documents signed under penalty of perjury, filed with a federal agency, describing a woman who had, in the same calendar year as at least one of those filings, completed a half marathon 2 states away. I compiled everything into a single, exhaustive dossier over those 3 weeks. The archived photos with intact metadata, the cross-referenced financial requests, the public race records, screenshots of my parents' own text messages describing Emily's supposed incapacity on dates the geolocation data directly contradicted. I didn't editorialize any of it. I didn't need to. I simply organized it the way I'd organize a technical incident report: chronological, sourced, verifiable. And I submitted the entire file directly to the Social Security Administration's Office of the Inspector General through their official fraud reporting portal, along with a cover statement identifying myself, my relationship to the beneficiary, and my willingness to provide further documentation or testimony if the investigation required. I didn't feel triumphant submitting that form. I felt something closer to exhausted relief, the particular flatness that arrives after you've finally set down something you've been carrying so long your body had stopped registering the weight of it as unusual. The investigation, I would learn much later, moved faster than I expected once it started. Though from my side, in the weeks immediately following, all I experienced was silence from the government and escalating hostility from my family, running on 2 entirely separate timelines I had no visibility into yet. My parents called less frequently after the 2nd week, and when they did call, the tone had shifted from guilt to something closer to desperation. My father asked at one point whether I might consider taking out a personal loan to bridge things until Emily's disability review was finalized, a request that struck me, hearing it, as almost unbearably ironic given what I now knew about the nature of that review. My mother sent a long voicemail I saved but never returned, alternating between anger and a kind of pleading I'd never heard from her before, describing bills piling up, describing Emily's supposed deterioration, describing, at one point, how disappointed my grandmother would have been to see what I'd become. I blocked all 3 of their numbers on a Thursday evening, without ceremony, without a final confrontational phone call, without any of the closure a scene like that might have in a different kind of story. I simply opened my phone's settings and removed, one by one, the 3 people who had spent 6 years teaching me that my worth to them began and ended with my bank balance. I didn't know it yet, blocking those numbers that evening, but federal investigators had already begun, 3 days earlier, requesting my parents' banking records under subpoena, cross-referencing wire transfers against the same public data I'd handed them, building toward a case considerably larger than the dossier I'd submitted had even suggested. I found out how much larger about 6 weeks later, when an investigator named Agent Coleman called to ask if I'd be willing to provide a formal statement. "Ms. Chen," he said, "I want to be upfront with you about the scope of what we're looking at here. Your report was the piece that opened this case. But your sister's SSDI fraud turned out to be the smallest part of it. /BR. Ms. Chen, he said, I want to be upfront with you about the scope of what we're looking at here. Your report was the piece that opened this case. But your sister's SSDI fraud turned out to be the smallest part of it. I sat very still, phone pressed to my ear, waiting for whatever came next with the same flat, procedural calm I'd carried through 3 weeks of building spreadsheets in a dark office. Once we pulled banking records and cross-referenced household income against benefits claimed, Agent Coleman continued, we found your parents had also been receiving Medicaid coverage for your sister based on the same disability determination. SNAP food assistance calculated using a household income that excluded, as far as we can tell, every dollar you sent them for 6 years, and a housing subsidy tied to the same fraudulent disability status. 4 separate federal and state programs, all built on continuing disability affidavits your parents signed and filed every 2 years, each one perjured. How much? I asked, because I understood somehow that I needed the number before I could process anything else. We're still finalizing the full accounting, he said, but current estimates put total fraudulent benefits received somewhere north of $400,000, not counting the private funds you contributed directly, which fall outside our jurisdiction but which your attorney may want to discuss separately as a civil matter. I didn't pursue the civil matter in the end. I want to say that plainly because I think it surprises people when I tell this story, that I let 6 years and roughly $200,000 of my own money simply go unrecovered once the federal case took its course. I didn't need the money back as much as I needed the lie to stop breathing. Once it did, I found I didn't have much appetite left for chasing the rest. The raid happened on a Tuesday morning in March, though I only know the date because Agent Coleman told me afterward, not because I witnessed any of it. Federal agents executed a search warrant at my parents' house, the same house I had helped make the mortgage payments on for 3 of the past 6 years without ever being told that help with the mortgage and rent, 2 entirely different framings I'd been given at different points, had in fact been referring to the exact same fraudulently sustained property. They seized financial records, electronic devices, and documentation. The SSA OIG's forensic team would spend the following months cataloging alongside my own submitted dossier. The Social Security Administration suspended all benefits to the household immediately, a decision that Agent Coleman told me arrived the same afternoon as the raid, cutting off, in a single administrative action, 6 years of a monthly check my family had built an entire fraudulent lifestyle around. Within a month, the SSA's Office of the Inspector General issued a formal demand for restitution. Not just the SSDI overpayments, but the Medicaid, SNAP, and housing subsidy amounts as well. A combined figure that, by the time the final audit closed, came to just over $430,000. My parents lost the house within the year, unable to sustain a mortgage that had, it turned out, been calculated against income figures that no longer existed once the fraudulent benefits stopped, and my own contributions had permanently ended. I heard about the foreclosure secondhand, through a cousin who still had my number, delivered with the particular relish of someone who had always suspected something was wrong in that house, and finally had the satisfaction of being right. Emily was indicted on federal charges of Social Security disability fraud, wire fraud connected to the interstate nature of several fraudulent transactions, and false statements to a federal agency, charges that, her public defender apparently argued in early filings, deserved leniency given her initial injury had been real. The prosecutor's response, according to the same cousin who seemed to be tracking the case with more enthusiasm than I could bring myself to muster, was blunt. The real injury made the 2 years of legitimate benefits legitimate. Everything after her documented recovery was a choice, made repeatedly, in writing under oath, for 4 additional years. My parents faced their own separate charges for conspiracy and false statements, the sworn continuing disability affidavits forming the backbone of a case that, according to Agent Coleman, was about as close to unwinnable as federal fraud cases got, given how thoroughly the geolocated, time-stamped evidence I'd submitted lined up against every claim they'd made in writing to the government. They tried to reach me twice more before everything fully resolved, once through a lawyer's letter, formal and stilted, asking whether I would be willing to help cover legal fees given the family's current hardship. A sentence that struck me, reading it in my kitchen on a Sunday morning, as almost admirable in its refusal to learn anything at all from the previous 6 months. I didn't respond. Once through my cousin again, relaying a message from my mother that she just wanted to talk, no pressure about money, which I understood, by that point in the story, to be its own kind of pressure, dressed in softer language for an audience that had finally stopped listening to any version of it. I didn't unblock the numbers. I don't know honestly if I ever will. I've made peace with the possibility that this particular door in my life may simply stay closed, not out of anger exactly, though there's still some of that left in me on certain nights, but out of a plainer, calmer understanding that a relationship built for 6 years on a lie doesn't automatically become safe to reopen just because the lie has been legally resolved. The letter confirming the case's closure arrived on an ordinary Wednesday, 9 months after I'd first opened that folder labeled asterisk documentation on my hard drive. It was formal, brief government letterhead, informing me that my role as the reporting party had been noted and appreciated, that the matter had been fully adjudicated, that no further action was required on my part. I read it twice at my kitchen table in the quiet, ordinary light of a Wednesday afternoon, and then I did something I hadn't done in 6 years. I opened a new bank account, a high-yield savings account in my name only, and I made the first deposit, the exact amount I would have wired my parents that month, had any of this never happened. I sat there for a while afterward, looking at the small, unremarkable confirmation number on the screen, feeling something settle in my chest that had nothing dramatic about it at all. No triumph, no lingering rage, just the plain, quiet sensation of money, for the first time in 6 years, building something that belonged to me instead of sustaining something that had never been true. The most expensive lesson of my life cost me roughly $200,000, and 6 years I will never get back. What it taught me, in the end, was simple enough to fit in a single sentence. One I think about now every time I check that account and watch the number grow instead of shrink. Family doesn't entitle anyone to your life. And the truth, whatever shape it's hiding in, is always sitting somewhere in the metadata, waiting for someone patient enough to go looking for it.